Another. Our 9 Health expert, Dr. Paul Coley, joins me now to talk about the impact. First, those most impacted. Dr. Coley, those people who witnessed the shooting, either in Boulder or maybe watching it as some of it was being streamed. Talk about the potential mental health effects of a trauma like that.
You know, Tom, we're already in the midst of a global pandemic, and we were dealing with the mental health fallout of that. And unfortunately, this type of mass violence, especially for us here in Colorado, is a second pandemic that we're dealing with because it keeps happening, doesn't go away, and it's incessant. And the mental health effects can be really profound. And to your point, they can happen to those that were directly there, but also those of us at home or those of us who have friends and family in the Boulder community who may be affected. And the most common reaction that people have is something called an acute stress response. This happens in about 1 in 3 people, and it's this anxiety, fear, helplessness, insomnia that occurs in the few days to weeks afterwards. But there are about 1/4 of people who will have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is hypervigilance and flashbacks. And you know, the clinical diagnosis of PTSD requires a number of criteria, and some people can experience that. And people who've lived through something like this actually may end up having longer-term mental health problems compared to a natural disaster or some other type of catastrophe.
We talked about how that trauma can manifest itself into a mental or a physical health issue. But as a doctor, it always seemed like there was an X-ray, an MRI, a blood test or something. With this type of event, that's a lot harder to look at and determine if you need help or if someone else you know needs help.
That's exactly right. There is no way to know, and the only way we're going to know is if we start looking for it. We know the signs and symptoms. So I really want us to be aware of the short-term signs and symptoms and also the long-term. And these are physical signs that can happen as well. So, you know, think about an acute stress response or PTSD. Your body is essentially releasing stress hormones at some level all the time. So it's a low-level fight or flight response. So you can have things like rapid heartbeat, insomnia, headache, of course, anxiety, arthritis. You can even have more long-term problems like weight gain, depressed immune system, you know, having a lot of issues with hypertension or high blood pressure. So lots of ways in which this can manifest physically. And then, of course, we've talked about the mental signs, both acutely and in the long term, that we all need to look out for in our friends and family.
This is a jolt. This is the pandemic maybe set in more like a fog on a lot of us. This is a jolt, and I imagine those impacts are different with people. How do we recognize it in someone, and how might we be able to help someone who could be suffering?
So I think the way to think about this is to look at the time period after. And to your point, because it happens so suddenly in a place that we trust, like the grocery store, it's really going to have an impact on all of us. But in the few days to weeks afterwards, Tom, that's the immediate period. That's when you really want to reach out to your friends and family. So connection is really important. You want to make sure to normalize their feelings, to tell them it's okay to feel helpless or scared or worried or anxious, and really work on what I like to call psychological first aid for your friends and family. That's in the days to about the week after where we are now. Starting next week, in the weeks to months after, you really want to start to look for signs of that somebody's developing PTSD or chronic illness and try to get them connected with the right resources. And that could include something like substance abuse. And then really when we start to go out several weeks or months, most of us thankfully have healed by then as a community, but some of us will have persistent lingering symptoms, especially those that develop PTSD. So for those, we really want to try to make sure that they have a medical provider and that we're working on their chronic issues.
Well, we have been trained over the last year to check in with and check up on our friends and family, so maybe that some of that training will help us out. Dr. Coley, we always appreciate it. Thanks. And a reminder that you can always get help 24/7 from Colorado Crisis Services. There's the number on your screen, 844-493-8255. You can also text the word TALK to 38255. They're also available on their website. And we have a link to resources like these on our website at 9news.com.